Today, let's dive into the life of Sant Tukaram. He was a 17th century poet saint from Maharashtra, and his voice, wow, it is just filled with this raw love and wisdom that still echoes through India today. And his story, it's really one of incredible transformation, born from the deepest, most unimaginable loss.
See, Tukaram wasn't just some distant, perfect saint. He was a real person who went through profound personal tragedy. But here's what's amazing. Instead of being crushed by it, he spun that suffering into a revolutionary message of devotion and social equality that completely reshaped the spiritual world around him.
And this quote, it gets right to the absolute core of his philosophy. He famously turned down gifts from a king, basically saying that the only thing that's truly valuable is just chanting God's name from the heart. It wasn't about arrogance. It was about realizing there's a much, much greater treasure. Okay, so to really get Tukaram, we first have to understand the world he was born into. And that means understanding the Varkari Tradition, this powerful, centuries-old devotional movement, all centered on the worship of Lord Vitala.
You know, the Varkaris often imagine their tradition as this great, beautiful temple built by saints over hundreds of years. So Saint Yaneshvar, way back in the 13th century, he laid the foundation. Others came along and built the walls and pillars. But Sant Tukaram, he's considered the kalash, the shining golden pinnacle that completes the whole structure. He took all those high teachings and made them real for everyday people.
Now, you might think that a great saint's story would start with hardship and poverty. But not Tukaram. Actually, it was the exact opposite. He was born into a pretty well-off family of traders and moneylenders. He was all set for a comfortable, normal life. And then, his entire world just fell apart. When he was only 17, his parents died. Then, a catastrophic famine hit the land. In the starvation that followed, he lost his first wife and his son. His business completely collapsed, he went bankrupt, and he was publicly shamed. All of this happened in such a short time. The series of crushing losses, it became the very fire that forged his spiritual journey. And this was his breaking point. You can just hear the absolute desperation in his own words. He had lost everything the world could possibly offer him. So with nothing left, he turned completely, with his whole heart, to the one thing that remained, his family's deity, Vitala.
So what did he do? Tukaram literally left his village and just retreated into the nearby hills. He started this period of intense, single-minded focus, meditating day and night, reading the works of the saints who came before him, and just crying out for a sign from God. And according to tradition, his prayers were answered through these incredible mystical experiences. First, he gets his sacred mantra, Ram Krishna Hari, from his guru in a dream. Then, the great saint Namdev appears to him, also in a dream, and gives him a mission to keep writing these devotional poems. And finally, after all this intense yearning, he was given a direct vision of Lord Vithala, an experience that just completely changed him forever. Fired up by this divine inspiration, Tukaram just started pouring out poetry. These poems, called abhangs, weren't written in some scholarly, high-minded Sanskrit that only the elite could understand. No, he wrote them in the simple, everyday Marathi that the villagers spoke. And you have to understand, this was a huge deal. It was a revolutionary act. It meant that spiritual wisdom was suddenly available to everyone, farmers, workers, women, not just the priests. But this deeply personal devotion, it didn't stay private for long. It spilled out into the open and became this powerful movement for social reform that went right up against the rigid, stuffy structures of his time.
I mean, the contrast couldn't be more clear. On one hand, you had the established religion, built on complicated rituals in a language most people didn't know, and this strict caste system that said who was worthy and who wasn't. And then you have Tukaram's path, which just swept all of that away. It was about direct love for God, sung out loud with your community, and it declared that in God's eyes, everyone, and I mean everyone, was equal. He wasn't just ignoring the caste system. He was taking a sledgehammer to its spiritual foundations. I mean, listen to those words. He's directly challenging the authority of the Orthodox elites. And as you can probably guess, that did not go over well with scholars like Rameshwar Bhatt, who basically saw Tukaram as a dangerous heretic. And all this conflict, it led to some of the most famous and legendary moments of his life, moments where his faith was put to the absolute test, and his influence reached all the way to the king himself. This story is just pivotal. The Orthodox authorities, they forced Tukaram to take his entire life's work, all of his poems, and sink them in the river. Can you imagine? It was the ultimate test. Heartbroken, Tukaram started a fast, preparing to die. And then, 13 days later, the impossible happened. The manuscripts floated back up to the surface, completely dry. This miracle basically silenced his critics and cemented his status as a true saint for everyone to see. His fame even reached the great Maratha king, Chhatrapati Shivaji, who actually came to him for advice. Now, Tukaram refused all of Shivaji's gifts, gold, jewels, you name it, but he gave him something way more valuable, spiritual guidance. He advised the king on his duty, his dharma, and really provided a moral compass for the entire Maratha Empire. So with a life that incredible, how did it end? And maybe more importantly, why has his influence not just lasted, but actually grown over these last 400 years? Well, his exit from the world is just as amazing as his life. In 1650, he basically told all his followers that he was leaving, going to Vaikuntha, the home of God. The tradition says that in the middle of this ecstatic community singing, a divine chariot came down and carried him up to the heavens in his physical body. And what reinforces this belief is that, unlike almost every other saint, Tukaram has no samadhi, no final tomb or resting place. So his legacy, it's just immense. His poems are basically memorized and sung in homes all over Maharashtra. He was this fierce advocate for social justice. He made worship a community event through kirtan. He inspired huge historical figures, from Shivaji all the way to Gandhi. And today, he's still the beating heart of the Varkari faith. And this brings us to something really fascinating and a little less known about his poetry. In some of his poems, Tukaram actually uses the name Allah to describe the one ultimate God. It just goes to show how truly universal his message was. For him, the specific name didn't matter as much as the divine love that it pointed to. Which kind of leaves us with this final thought. In our world, which can feel so complicated, so divided, and so unfair at times, what can we learn from a man who faced the worst life could throw at him and responded not with anger, but with an explosion of poetry that championed love, equality, and a simple, direct connection to the divine? How can his voice still speak to us today?